Glenn Ford was never the loudest man in the room, and he was never the kind of actor who demanded attention with big gestures or flashy performances. Yet somehow, when he appeared on screen, it was impossible to look away. Born Gwyn Samuel Newton Ford on May 1, 1916, in Quebec City, Canada, Glenn Ford came from a modest background, far removed from Hollywood glamour. His family later moved to California, where his father worked steadily as a railroad executive. Life was stable, but not luxurious, and young Glenn learned early the value of discipline, responsibility, and quiet determination. Unlike many future stars who dreamed of fame from childhood, Ford's path was slow and grounded. He discovered acting gradually, first through school activities and then through a local theater group, where he learned not how to impress, but how to listen, observe, and react. These early lessons would shape his entire career. He was not interested in exaggeration. He wanted truth. When Glenn Ford entered the film industry in the late 1930s, Hollywood was filled with polished stars trained to shine brightly and confidently. Ford was different. He signed with Columbia Pictures, a studio known more for modest productions than grand prestige. But this environment worked in his favor. Without the pressure of instant stardom, Ford was able to study the craft of screen acting closely. He learned how small movements could speak louder than words, how silence could carry emotion, and how restraint could feel more powerful than display. His early roles showed promise, but just as his career was gaining traction, World War II interrupted everything. Glenn Ford enlisted in the United States Navy and served in active combat operations in the Pacific. This experience was not a brief interruption. It became a defining chapter in his life. War exposed him to danger, loss, and human fragility, leaving a lasting mark on his worldview. When he returned to Hollywood after the war, something had changed. His performances carried a deeper seriousness, a quiet weight that audiences could feel even if they could not name it. The late 1940s and 1950s became Glenn Ford's golden era. He rose steadily, not as a traditional matinee idol, but as a deeply believable leading man. His breakthrough role came in Gilda in 1946, opposite Rita Hayworth. While Hayworth dazzled audiences with beauty and fire, Ford anchored the film with emotional control and internal struggle. He played a man haunted by love, jealousy, and pride, expressing more through his eyes and posture than through dialogue. The contrast between Ford's restraint and Hayworth's intensity created magic. Audiences sensed pain beneath his calm exterior, and that emotional honesty set him apart. Throughout the 1950s, Glenn Ford showed extraordinary range. In film noir, he became the perfect face of moral conflict. His performance in The Big Heat in 1953 remains one of the most respected in the genre. As Detective Dave Banyan, Ford portrayed a man driven by justice, but scarred by loss. His anger never exploded wildly. Instead, it simmered quietly, making it even more frightening. Viewers believed him because he never overplayed the role. At the same time, Ford was redefining the Western hero. Unlike traditional Western stars who played fearless and invincible figures, Glenn Ford's characters were human, flawed, and burdened by conscience. His role in 3:10 to Yuma in 1957 stands as one of the finest performances in Western cinema. As outlaw Ben Wade, Ford delivered a character that was charming, intelligent, dangerous, and strangely honorable. He was not a simple villain. He was a man aware of his own contradictions. Ford's ability to suggest inner thought without explanation made the character unforgettable. Beyond drama and action, Glenn Ford also excelled in comedy and romance. Films like The Courtship of Eddie's Father showed a softer, warmer side of him. He played a widowed father navigating love and responsibility with sincerity and kindness. This versatility made him one of the most adaptable actors of his generation. He did not rely on a single image. He moved comfortably between genres, always grounded in realism. Audiences trusted him because he felt real. By the end of the 1950s, Glenn Ford had built a reputation not just as a star, but as a craftsman. He was respected by directors, admired by fellow actors, and loved by audiences who sensed his honesty. His performances did not shout for attention, but they stayed with viewers long after the screen faded to black. As Hollywood entered the 1960s and 1970s, the industry began to change rapidly. New styles, younger stars, and shifting audience tastes reshaped the landscape. For many actors of Glenn Ford's generation, this transition was difficult. Some faded away, while others struggled to adapt. Glenn Ford, however, approached this phase with the same quiet professionalism that defined his earlier career. While his box office dominance softened, his performances grew richer and more reflective. He began to take on roles that emphasized experience, wisdom, and emotional complexity, rather than physical strength or youthful charm. Television became a larger part of his career, and instead of resisting the change, Ford embraced it. He understood that storytelling mattered more than medium. One of his most memorable late-career roles came in Superman in 1978, where he portrayed Jonathan Kent, the adoptive father of Clark Kent. Though his screen time was limited, his presence left a deep impression. Ford embodied moral strength, kindness, and quiet guidance. In just a few scenes, he communicated the values that would shape Superman's character for life. It was a perfect reflection of Glenn Ford's acting philosophy. Say less, mean more. While his professional life showed consistency and control, Glenn Ford's personal life was far more complicated. Behind the calm public image was a man who struggled with emotional balance and long-term relationships. His first and most significant marriage was to Eleanor Powell, one of Hollywood's most celebrated dancers and stars of the Golden Age. Powell was known for her extraordinary discipline, athletic talent, and commanding screen presence. When she and Ford married in 1943, both were rising stars facing enormous professional pressure. Their marriage produced one child, Peter Ford, born in 1945. Fatherhood meant a great deal to Glenn Ford, even though his demanding schedule often kept him away from home. Those close to him described him as caring and proud of his son's achievements. However, the reality of two ambitious careers, constant travel, and public scrutiny placed heavy strain on the marriage. Over time, emotional distance grew between Ford and Powell. Powell reportedly sacrificed parts of her career for family life, while Ford's career continued to rise steadily. The imbalance created quiet resentment and disappointment. After 16 years together, the marriage ended in divorce in 1959. This marked a turning point in Glenn Ford's personal life. In the years that followed, Ford married 3 more times, each relationship reflecting both his desire for companionship and his difficulty maintaining emotional closeness. His second marriage, to actress Katherine Hayes in 1966, lasted only 3 years. Though they shared a professional background, shared careers were not enough to bridge deeper emotional gaps. His third marriage, to Cynthia Hayward in 1977, lasted longer, spanning 7 years before ending in 1984. By this stage in his life, Ford was older and seemingly searching for stability. Yet the pattern repeated. These personal struggles did not turn him bitter or publicly resentful. Instead, Glenn Ford remained private, disciplined, and respectful. Many observers have noted a striking similarity between Ford's personal life and his acting style. The same emotional restraint that made him compelling on screen may have made real intimacy harder off-screen. He was a man who felt deeply but expressed cautiously. Rather than dramatic confrontations, his life was shaped by quiet decisions and unspoken distance. This contrast adds depth to his legacy. Glenn Ford was not a flawless hero, neither in films nor in life. He was human, layered, and often conflicted. Yet through it all, he maintained professionalism and dignity. He continued to work steadily, never chasing trends, never forcing relevance. Instead, he trusted his instincts and his craft. Directors valued his reliability. Co-stars respected his focus. Audiences recognized his honesty. Glenn Ford did not need to reinvent himself loudly. He evolved naturally, allowing age and experience to deepen his performances. In a business obsessed with youth and attention, his quiet endurance became one of his greatest strengths. In recognition of his contributions to cinema, Glenn Ford received several honors throughout his career, including a Golden Globe Award for Pocketful of Miracles in 1961. Yet, awards were never the true measure of his impact. Glenn Ford's greatest achievement lies in the lasting relevance of his work. Long after trends have faded and styles have changed, his performances continue to feel honest and alive. Film students, actors, and directors often study his work to understand the power of understatement. Ford showed that an actor does not need to dominate a scene to control it. Sometimes, the quietest presence is the strongest. He trusted silence as much as dialogue, and in doing so, he allowed audiences to participate emotionally. Viewers leaned in, searching his face, sensing the thoughts behind his eyes. This approach required confidence, patience, and deep understanding of human behavior. Glenn Ford never acted for applause. He acted for truth. His influence can be seen in generations of actors who favor realism over exaggeration. In Westerns, he helped reshape the genre by introducing moral ambiguity and emotional depth. In noir films, he showed that strength could coexist with vulnerability. In dramas and comedies alike, he brought warmth without sentimentality. Even in supporting roles late in life, he carried a sense of gravity that elevated the material. Glenn Ford passed away on August 30th, 2006, at the age of 90, leaving behind a body of work that spans decades and genres. His life and career remind us that success does not always come from noise or spectacle. Sometimes it comes from consistency, discipline, and quiet integrity. Glenn Ford was never the most flamboyant star, but he was one of the most trustworthy. Audiences believed him because he believed in what he was doing. In an industry built on illusion, he offered sincerity. That sincerity is why his films continue to resonate. His characters feel familiar because they reflect real people, men struggling with duty, love, regret, and honor. Glenn Ford showed that masculinity could be thoughtful, that strength could be gentle, and that heroism could be complicated. He was not afraid of complexity. He embraced it. Today, as viewers rediscover classic cinema, Glenn Ford's work stands as a reminder of a different kind of stardom, one built not on hype, but on craft, not on ego, but on discipline, not on volume, but on meaning. His legacy is not defined by controversy or scandal, but by consistency and respect. Glenn Ford earned his place in film history by staying true to himself. And in doing so, he left behind something rare and valuable, a body of work that still speaks, quietly but powerfully, to anyone willing to listen. Glenn Ford lived long enough to watch Hollywood change into something he no longer recognized, and that change weighed heavily on him in his later years, not because he hated new actors, but because the industry he had given his entire life to no longer valued the same things that once defined greatness. Ford came from a time when success was slow, painful, and uncertain, when actors were trained through failure, rejection, and long years of invisibility before they were ever allowed to shine. In the old studio system, nothing was handed to you. You earned your place by enduring small roles, strict contracts, and relentless pressure to improve. Ford believed that struggle was not just part of acting, but the very thing that gave it meaning. Pain shaped performance, and restraint created depth. By the time Tom Selleck rose to fame in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Hollywood had changed its rules. Television had become powerful, charm mattered as much as skill, and audiences welcomed confidence without questioning how it was earned. To Ford, Selleck's rise through Magnum P.I. felt too smooth, too effortless, and too clean. It was not that Ford believed Selleck was untalented or lazy. In fact, Ford openly admitted that Selleck was professional, reliable, and prepared. But professionalism alone was never enough for him. Ford believed that acting was a form of confession, a quiet admission of inner conflict, fear, and emotional scars. When he looked at Selleck on screen, he saw ease instead of tension, polish instead of struggle, and comfort instead of restraint. Ford had spent decades playing men burdened by doubt, regret, and moral weight. His characters rarely smiled easily, rarely felt secure, and almost never appeared untouched by life. That, to Ford, was masculinity. It was heavy, conflicted, and often silent. Selleck's image, tall, athletic, relaxed, and charming, felt to Ford like a return to a simpler hero, one without visible wounds. Ford once said that he never trusted heroes without scars, because life does not spare anyone, and acting that ignores pain ignores truth. What truly troubled Ford was not Selleck himself, but what Selleck represented. He symbolized a Hollywood that no longer required suffering as a teacher. To Ford, the audience's easy acceptance of Selleck as a serious actor felt like a rejection of the old values he had lived by. Ford had paid his dues through war service, personal loss, failed relationships, and countless supporting roles before ever becoming a leading man. He believed those experiences carved something into an actor that could not be faked or skipped. When Ford said he resented what success had come to stand for, he was not speaking with bitterness towards Selleck, but with grief toward an industry that had moved on without looking back. This resentment grew stronger as Ford aged, not because Selleck continued to succeed, but because Ford could feel his own era slipping away. Hollywood no longer needed men who carried quiet weight. It wanted faces that felt familiar, reassuring, and easy to like. Ford understood this shift intellectually, but emotionally, it felt like displacement. He was no longer the standard, and worse, the standard itself had changed. As his career slowed and his health began to fail, these thoughts became heavier. Ford was dealing with heart and circulation problems that drained his strength and limited his ability to work. Acting, which had once been his discipline and purpose, became physically dangerous. He knew that continuing would risk not only the quality of his performances, but his life. When he stepped away from acting,